lot of our data is traded and hoovered up and then sold. Next, please. Next slide. This became a major issue when Mr. Snowden exposed how systematic this surveillance was, and it was not done by some street goon or some mafia. It was done by the government of United States, the National Security Administration. And this is a book which Washington Post published about that revelation, and the Guardian in London also had a huge exposure of it. So we're living in what Professor Zoboff, who is a professor at Harvard, has called surveillance capitalism. So it's very important for us in India to understand, because we are still early stages of this kind of digital capitalism, that it's not just a problem of authoritarian states. It is actually much more subtle and widespread in the great democracies. In fact, the US being the top of that list. So that's the kind of, if you like, background within which we need to think about global communication. That's the reality, or the dominant reality. Let me put it this way. And there are reasons that there's no time to kind of just discuss in this session, but there's a reason why that is why there is this domination. There is historical reason. There is the sophisticated research and a lot of investment and support from the government and big corporations, etc. And these things work. That's why we use them. What has made it more complicated and sort of upset the status quo is the rise of China. And not just China as a political power, but China as a technical power. And that has really led to a lot of problems in the countries and corporations who were in command. Next slide, please. So you're all aware of this major infrastructural project called BRI, Belt and Road Initiative. And of course, with COVID, it's going to get a setback. Countries are in a mess, economies are declining everywhere. So all that investment that the Chinese have put in across these countries is going to be a big problem for them to recover. But it just shows you the ambition of it. This is the largest infrastructure project in the world. There are 900 projects for the next 10 years. And it's not just, as you see here, there's also one pole, which we don't hear much about. We hear about the maritime road and belt across the Eurasian region. But there is also this idea of a one pole. China has got nothing to do with it. It's not a polar nation, but it's investing a lot in that. It doesn't get as much attention as it ought to. And there is also a very important communication dimension to it. The Chinese speak of digital Silk Roads. They're investing a huge amount of money in various BRI-related projects to ensure that their content, their narrative, their infrastructure is preferred to the Western one, and that's leading to the kind of tension I referred to earlier. So China's rise, of course, is, we have had a problem in Ladakh recently, and we're still dealing with it. That's just one example of a certain assertiveness, some might say certain arrogance that comes with that power that China now wields and exercises it, whether it is in South China Sea or it is in Ladakh. But that's a a different kind of debate, and I don't think we have. This is the occasion to discuss it. But I just wanted to flag that this is that communication power is related with actual power, and we watch American films, we watch American television because America is powerful. So I want to just spend some time to talk about the change. So this is a big change. Chinese expansion, Chinese growth, Chinese investment, and Chinese prowess in technical arena is challenging the status quo. What is it doing to the internet? Next slide, please. So as we all know, internet was conceived and devised and developed by the United States, which still controls its governance, its commerce, its infrastructure, but its usage has changed. When internet was privatized in the early 90s, in 1995, 61% of people who were using the internet were Americans. By 2014, that figure had shrunk to 10%. Today, it is in single digits. At the same time, there has been exponential growth of internet usage in the so-called developing world, particularly in Asia, and particularly in the two largest countries in Asia, China and India. And I want to talk a bit about that, what it means to global communication, because more often than not, global is identified with the West. X country has become global because it is following a Western way of life. Internet actually changes some of that. And that is an interesting area for research. Next one, please. So this is some data from this latest available data about internet usage. 2.3 billion people in Asia use the internet. It's the largest proportion. But the penetration rate is still below the world average. Is just over 53%, which means that 47% of Asians are not online, as against North America, where 95% are online. So if you're in a country like Denmark, which is 4 million people, and everybody has internet access, even if they have 5 mobile phones, that's 20 million phones. That's nothing. In India or China, we're talking about a lot more people. So the future growth is going to come from the global south and Asia particularly. So because penetration rate still in 2020 is just about half, just over half. Next, please. The world's largest internet is actually in China. This is from 2018. The latest figure is that now it's about 900 million people have access. It may be soon touching 1 billion, especially because of the expansion of mobile internet, which has grown exponentially in China. And it's not just the access, it is also the usage in terms of mobile payment systems, for example, or hailing a taxi or shopping online, etc. It is actually quite advanced. I'm somebody who spent a year in Beijing. I can tell you from personal experience. When I come back to London, London feels, digitally speaking, quite backward in relation to Beijing. But that's by and by. Next slide, please. But Chinese internet, as we know, is not open. Chinese internet is closed. It's a national internet. So the world's largest open internet is in India. And it has grown extraordinarily in the last 2 decades. So just look at this chart. In 2000, only just over 5 million people were online in a country of 1 billion, at that time, 1 billion people. Today it's 600 million. And again, one thing that COVID has done is it expanded digitalization. And what Mr. Modi's Digital India project has done is expanded that. So there is a serious effort being made both by the state and corporations to provide that digital connectivity. And of course, you know, it's got many issues. The infrastructure isn't as good. The connectivity issues are there. The last mile connectivity, particularly in a country where a large proportion live in the countryside. So there are issues, but the growth is phenomenal. Next slide, please. And here I think it's worth mentioning the role played by Mr. Ambani's Jio. It has actually transformed digital communication in India. And today, it is a major and increasingly serious global player in terms of digital economy and digital culture. This Jio was only set up in 2015, and today it has something like 400 million subscribers, which is incredible. Which still means there is a huge proportion of Indians who are not online. It's also remarkable that this has got, I think, quite a strong support from the state. So there is this idea that, you know, a country of this size and complexity should have an Indian internet. It shouldn't be dependent on Google and Facebooks of the world. And I think there are some lessons to be learned from our neighbor to our east. Next slide, please. This I found in a very interesting piece in the Mint, I think it was. And it was very, I hadn't thought about this kind of verticals, how they're working already in just those 4 or 5 years since Jio came into being. So it's got from streaming services to fintech to publishing to all kinds of different verticals are already in place, and it's got 22 as of this year, as against Amazon's 37 and Alibaba's 34. So it's operating even at this early stage at a global level of sophistication and ambition, and I think that's very important. It's also important to remind our audience here that data, I think it was Mr. Ambani who said in a public meeting, Prime Minister was sharing the dais with him, and he said, you know, we fought for our political independence against the Brits, and we need now digital independence, and data is the new oil, and we got to have control of our own data. Although this year, as you know, he signed a little deal with Facebook for $10 billion or whatever. So Facebook has some investment in it. But majority share is Indian, and that's important. Data in India is cheapest in the world. It's a huge amount of data, and it's the cheapest. So I'll just give you a figure. 1 GB mobile data in India costs 26 cents. Same amount of data in China costs $10. In the United States, it costs $12. So we have incredibly cheap data, probably the cheapest in the world. So the scale and the scope of growth is phenomenal. Let's also not forget that, like China, India also has a massive diaspora. China has 35 million, India has nearly 30 million. And they are also increasingly connected. This particular event, I'm sitting in London, I'm talking to my friends in Bangalore and elsewhere in India. that's going to grow. And again, digitization is extremely important in that. Next slide, please. China, again, is fascinating. I've just finished a book, is coming out in November, an edited book, where I have a chapter about what I call de-Americanizing the internet. And I was looking at the Chinese internet, quite interesting, because much of the debate about Chinese internet outside China is about censorship, which is understandable. It's a control system. It's a one-party state. It's the state and party are the same. It's an authoritarian system, and therefore, it's important that that issue is highlighted, censored. This is really, there are dozens of books, and I just picked one, The Great Firewall of China, by this James Griffiths, who is a former journalist. Interesting book, but again, from a very narrow perspective. What has been almost totally ignored, apart from specialists who study these things, is that precisely because China had a censorship regime, it was able to ward off the Googles of the world and the Facebooks of the world. And the outside world, the New York Times and the Economist and the BBC were busy about talking about, censorship. And it's okay, you talk about, that's fine, but we will develop our own internet. And that's precisely they have done. And I would say successfully. Next slide, please. A few years ago, 2018, I think it was, I published a book with a colleague in London and one in Beijing. It was called China's Media Go Global. And I used this phrase, I had chapter in it, and I used this phrase, cyber capitalism with Chinese characteristics. Well, I argued that every major digital property that exists in the world that you and I use, whether it is WhatsApp or Google or YouTube, the Chinese have an equivalent. No other country has managed this. The Germans, the French, the Brits, the Russians, the Brazilians, the Indians, we are all using basically American content. The Russians have done a few things, but nothing in the scale of this. And what is more interesting is some of these companies now, Alibaba being a prominent example, are operating today globally. Despite 59, apps banned in India, the major things like Paytm, that's not been touched, right? There's big money. That's money. That money is from Alibaba, and Tencent has a lot of investment in India. So you have to ask, why were they able to do that? Why haven't we done it? We were supposed to be an IT superpower. I'm talking to people in Bangalore, which is the center of this. What went wrong? Were we too, enamored of Google and Facebook to realize that we have to have our own, and we haven't done that yet. Next, please, next slide. 5G, which is coming, in some places already arrived in parts of China. China is leading the way. I mean, it's ahead of everybody else. It's ahead of Japanese, of Koreans, of Brits. Brits don't stand anywhere. Americans, Scandinavians. And it's not about telephones. 5G is about Internet of Things, which is a different kind of digital experience. And it has security implications, it has surveillance issues, and so much debate. I don't want to labor that point. It's been happening in US, in India, especially as a reaction to Chinese assertiveness and their overreach. So I mentioned these just to kind of signal a change that is already taken place in global communication space. And I think as Indians, we need to be thinking of not in the binary terms of West versus China, but in a more nuanced way, because I think it's very important to understand what's happening there and try to learn from it. Next slide, please. So what we have is essentially in the dominant discourse around the world is that there is this new kind of conflict going on between an authoritarian state, which is becoming very muscular and powerful and technically advanced, against a weakened West, especially United States. Now, this argument has lots of holes in it. For a start, US economy is far, far too strong to be undermined by China. Its military is infinitely more advanced than anyone else on the planet. I showed you earlier the top digital companies and the kind of money they have and the influence they have. I don't think an Alibaba or a Tencent or a Baidu is anywhere near that. So that's important to understand. It may be constructed, it may not be real. As the Cold War was not real. Cold War was very hot. 24 million people died in so-called third world in Cold War period. When it was considered cold, there was no problem. The problem is in Africa. The problem is in Vietnam. Similarly, I think it's very important for educated opinion to be aware of that. This may be a construct, and one has to inquire deeper into it. Next, please. Okay, so it's very hard to kind of predict how this will map out. But one thing is, I think, pretty clear, to me at least, that a process of globalization which sort of takes shape after the kind of the Cold War, which is a kind of Anglo-globalization, which is expansion of America and American values and American technology and American culture, I think that is coming to an end. The first jolt to that was 2008 financial crisis. And it's interesting that two countries which did relatively well out of that, were less affected were China and India, because these countries were not as globalized as many other developing countries. I think with COVID, now one can think of a kind of deglobalization, a process now coming to an end. And it's interesting if you think historically, 30 years is a good period to rethink what's happening in the world. And that deglobalization is already beginning to take shape, whether it is the America First ideology of Mr. Trump, or Brexit here in London, or nationalism of various types, whether it's religious or ethnic or whatever, in various parts of the world, the Turkey, Hungary, China, India, elsewhere. And the other related point with that is the kind of nationalization of the internet, and therefore a de-Americanization of the internet. So a Chinese model, which, if you're not a Western, so you'll see and say, well, why is it that a country of 1 billion people, we don't have a mobile phone of our own? Something is not right. Why is that 70% of the market for smartphones in India, which is the second largest market in the world, is controlled by Chinese companies? Why can't we make them? Anyway, next point, please. Next slide. Next slide. Yes. So that's connected to the idea of cyber sovereignty, and that's one of the biggest battles in contemporary international relations. Who has the control? Who governs it? Why should a US body decides what kind of internet code you should have? Domain name, who decides that? All those conventions, who creates that? So there's a lot of debate, and I think India is there's a kind of two camps, broadly speaking, a kind of sovereignist camp, which is Russia, China, Brazil, Iran, etc., and then you have the kind of multi-stakeholders and let the market decide. I think India has a slightly more complex position, which is understandable given the situation in India. Same with data localization. I mentioned Mr. Ambani's comment earlier. I think it's a very significant comment. Why shouldn't the Indian data stay in India? I mean, you need infrastructure, build it. You've got a huge, data is the cheapest in the world, and it's going to grow. It's still, a large proportion of Indian population is not connected. In the next 10 years, it will be. So do you want that data to be traded in New York Stock Exchange, or you want to be in Mumbai? Next, please. Weaponization of information. I sort of alluded to it earlier when I was talking about fake news, but now there is a sort of systematic weaponization of information and communication, and not just by the states. So, you have the jihadi groups doing it, you have the trolls of various color and orientation doing it, machines doing it. I mean, so that's something which will define the communication world of next decade, and it's already beginning to, but it will be accelerated and institutionalized in a manner that hasn't happened yet. Next, please. Particularly relevant for us in India, digital for development. It's, China has a very interesting program called Internet Plus, which is essentially geared at providing state services to every village in the country. And I had the privilege to travel in poorer parts of China. I've been going there since 2004, every year. But last year, I spent a whole year. I was at Tsinghua University as a visiting professor. And it was an eye-opening experience for an Indian person to see how much they have achieved in terms of rural development, basic infrastructure, and so digital for development, not the NGO approach of the Americans, but actually state-sponsored projects which make a difference to the village level. And I think with all its many issues and problems of Mr. Modi's government, one thing he has done is to give a boost to the Digital India project. And I think that is absolutely fantastic and essential. To just look at the COVID crisis and think of all these very poor people who were not able to, if there was no internet system in place, if there wasn't Aadhaar, if there wasn't JAM, there would have been many, many more problems. So India is already working on that infrastructure, but it needs a lot more to do. And then if you're successful, and in a democratic setup, you can do that. That will be a phenomenal thing to export to much of the developing world. Final one more. Yeah. Thank you. So increasingly, people speak of a digital Cold War, especially in the United States, especially in certain elite publications, policy journals, think tank reports. It's how you kind of make something very like common sense argument. There is a digital Cold War, and this is between China and the United States. And it's about AI, it's about 5G, it's about Internet of Things, etc. What we forget sometimes is that China's technical rise was predicated on its relationship with big American companies and European companies. The intellectual property, a lot of intellectual property that you see in smartphones in China is not indigenous. It's been imported or stolen or adapted. So like the first Cold War, this Cold War too is quite complicated, and one has to be skeptical about looking at it in a kind of either or binary sense, especially in India, because we had this amazing history of being on both sides of Cold War. So here also we need to be slightly more sensible about to see where our national interest lies. Finally, my last slide, and then we might have some time for questions. I started with history, and I want to return to history. I did my master's in history, and I have a master's in politics, and I have a PhD in international relations. So I'm not a communication person as such. I teach communication, but as you probably have guessed, communication from a kind of international relations, geopolitics perspective, that's what I do. This is a chart I saw in a book that Arvind Subramaniam published, the former chief economic advisor to the government of India. It's a book about China, actually. It's very some of the most interesting things that I have read about China are by Indian scholars, funnily enough, because I don't think they carry that Western perspective. They have slightly more nuanced view of China. So here you have the three countries, top countries in terms of economic dominance, weighted by share of global GDP, world GDP, trade, and net capital exports. So 1870, Britain was at top, followed by Germany and France. People forget how important Germany was as an economic power and is as an economic power. 1870s, when Germany was reunited as a nation. It was only created in 1870, and it had the second largest economic power in the world. 1973 is the United States, it's Japan, and it's Germany. So the traditional imperial powers, Britain and France, are out. Nobody has told that to the British establishment, that you were out in the 70s, but they still think that they rule the world, but that's a different story in itself. 2010, the United States, China has come up, and Japan. 2030, not very far, only a decade away. The forecast is there will be China, United States, and India. Now, of course, it can go wrong with COVID. Lots of things will go wrong. There might be internal problems in India or China, or somebody, Trump's type character comes in power and does something really silly. But if we look at history, I think there is an argument to be made, and some people have made it very eloquently, that when you talk about rise of Asia, there's a lot of work done in international relations about rise of Asia. Kishore Mehbubani, who is a international civil servant and diplomat in Singapore, he calls it not rise but return of Asia. It's a very different way of thinking about it. His argument is that the 18th century, 60+% of global GDP came from Asia. A large proportion of that from China, followed by India. So it's not surprising then in 2030, people are saying it's going to be China, US, and India. And I think if that was to happen, it may not be the top three, it may be fourth, fifth, whatever. But, and given the numbers involved, 1.3 billion in India, 1.4 billion in China, it's going to be a very different kind of communication. It may not necessarily be in English. Already Chinese internet is not in English. And in India, one of the biggest growth in communication in terms of media or general social media community is not in English language. It is in India's various old sophisticated languages, which, so it's democratized communication in that sense. And I think that would be my final point, to say that, there is an interesting historical continuity that we should not lose sight of. And, in the post-COVID world, if there is a post-COVID world, we don't know how that will map out. I think, and despite of the problems that we had recently with China, and they're not going to go away because they have long history, the equation that will define the world, in my view, in the next decades to come is the India-China equation. And I think I'll end on that note. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daya, Thussu. It was an excellent presentation, because you are an expert in global communication. I think you have written a lot of books on international communication, and your book has seen maybe 4 or 5 editions. And your book on international communication is one of the best in the world, which is offered by majority of our universities globally.
Thank you,
sir. We have a valedictory function, and all our honorable guests have arrived. Our honorable Vice Chancellor of Bangalore University, Professor Vinay, and the Editor-in-Chief of Mint, Mr. Vinay Kamat. All of them have arrived. We have some questions, but lack of time. What to do, sir? How to go about? Shall we take one or two questions, or shall we start the function?
So is he asking me? I'm happy to answer questions. I'm happy, but it depends on the time.
Yeah, I will take only one question, sir, by the time.
Okay.
Suparna Naresh from Christ University, she has a question. Many academics say that barring Al Jazeera, most Eastern Asian media platforms are viewed only for the exotic value and not given their due from the Western world. What is your call?
Because good question actually. Because the domination, as I tried to explain, is so widespread and deep that's very difficult to make space into that system. But having said that, I think if we're thinking of news terms, of course, that is very difficult. But in the digital space, in online communication, is much more democratic. A lot more voices are being heard, and because it's not just the state broadcasters, as it were. A lot of online only publications and media institutions are becoming visible, but it will take time because the structures are still very much controlled by the few organizations, few countries. But if you think of the other major networks, RT is a Russian one that's doing very well in parts of Europe. Apparently, it is the most watched 24/7 news network on YouTube. Of course, it's Russian perspective, but it is available in different languages, in Arabic and in English, etc., and has a certain audience.
Okay, sir. Thank you. And the last question. Questions are pouring in, but we have very limited time, sir. This is the last question. Dr. Shakuntala Soratur from Karnataka University. She has a question. COVID-19 is not just about communication domination, but emergence of China as overall superpower at the cost of so many innocent lives. So what do you think will be the reaction of today's superpower after corona pandemic kind of disappears?
Sorry,
COVID-19 is not just about communication domination, but
yes.
emergence of China as overall superpower at the cost of so many innocent lives. So what do you think will be the reaction of today's superpower after corona pandemic kind disappears?
Well, the origin of this dreadful virus are controversial in itself, but the general perception is that it has come from China, and therefore there is a lot of anti-Chinese sentiments, understandably, because so many people have lost their lives and so many economies have been destroyed. So I think there will be China will have to work harder to actually sell its model, as it were, because it's coming for a great deal of criticism, and I think that criticism is going to continue. In fact, we hear it is becoming strident in so many countries. And as I mentioned in my lecture also, China has been being more assertive and more muscular, and that is also creating a bad press, if you like. There is a reaction, especially in the United States, but more broadly in the Western world, and of course in India. So I think this COVID is actually very bad news for everybody, including for China.
Thank you very much, Dr. Daya Thussu. So now we will, sir, our Honorable Vice Chancellor has joined us. We will start the valedictory function. So shall we start, sir? VC, sir?
Yeah, namaste. Start.
So now, thank you very much. This is the 6th day. Now we are starting the valedictory session of our first edition of an international webinar on the resiliency of media in the times of global crisis, challenges and opportunities. Now we'll start the valedictory session with an invocation by Professor Sushila, the Chairperson, Department of Performing Arts, Bangalore University.
Kundendu tushara haradhala ya shubhra
Okay, thank you, Professor Sushila, the chairperson of Department of Performing Arts. She performed the invocation. Now, may I request my colleague, Dr. N. Sanjuraj, Associate Professor, Department of Communication, Bangalore University, to deliver the welcome address.
Thank you, sir. Good evening, everybody. Esteemed dignitaries, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues. Department of Communication initiatives have always set a milestone in the Faculty of Communication since its inception. Our national webinar in the third week of June, Press Day celebrations, and now international webinars have always attempted to record a new history and inspired our fellow institutions to continue the legacy. Always, the Department of Communication alter and grab a difficulty era into a positive environment and also contribute for knowledge-based society. As we believe, knowledge and wisdom is the only meaningful factor of existence and meaningful creation of mankind. With this food for thoughts, I am pleased in welcoming each one of you for valedictory session to the international live webinar on resiliency of media in the times of global crisis, challenges and opportunities. I with pleasure welcome the face and pride of Bangalore University, Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor Venugopal K.R., a great scholar, philosopher, and distinguished educator of internationally renowned Association of Computing Machinery, scholar fellow of a reputed agency called the Institute of Electrical and Electronics Engineers, and prime promoter of Public Relations Council of India to preside over the webinar. Department of Communication is very proud of contributions of our beloved Vice Chancellor, Professor Venugopalji, to the university. Honorable Vice Chancellor have invested time in building the university on par with global standards in excellent facilities and built enduring relationship with some of the world's most elite higher education institutions. All of this is with the aim of creating a great university and offering a world-class education and student experience with employment-focused academic programs. Need to mention that we were able to host a series of webinars with his tireless support. I heartily welcome Chief Guest for the day, Shri Vinay Kamat, a veteran journalist and editor-in-chief of the Business Daily Mint. Shri Kamat is one of our pride alumni of Communication Department. Earlier, he was serving as editor of College Times, an English newspaper in UAE. Prior to College Times, Kamat served as a resident editor of Times of India's Bangalore edition, and before that, he was the resident editor of DNA newspaper in Bangalore as well. He also served for IndiaTimes.com and Sunday Times of India. Today, Sri Kamat is going to address on journalism in reset mode. The guest of honor, Dr. Daya, Thussu, is Professor of International Communication in the Department of Journalism, Hong Kong Baptist University, Hong Kong. He was visiting professor and inaugural Disney Chair in Global Media at Swartman College, Tsinghua University in Beijing. He is on editorial boards of more than 30 journals, which is internationally renowned. Also, expressing our utmost acknowledgement for my department colleagues, Dr. B.K. Ravi, Professor and Chairman, Department of Communication and Webinar Chairperson, and former Registrar of Bangalore University, is a great communicator and has chaired nearly 14 scientific sessions at international conferences all over the world. And Professor Dr. BKR was on the scientific committee on media and information literacy constituted by UNESCO. Now standing as one of the stalwart and strongest resource for communication department and other fellow institutions. I also welcome Dr. B. Shri, Associate Professor and Webinar Convener. I formally welcome one and all once again. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Sanjuraj, and we also welcome Dr. Daya K. Thussu. We have requested him to be the chief guest for this valedictory session also. Before this valedictory session, he delivered an excellent lecture on global communication. So now, before we start the valedictory address by Shri Vinay Kamat, I have a message from our Honorable Deputy Chief Minister and Higher Education Minister of Government of Karnataka, Dr. C.N. Ashwath Narayan. Within a minute, I'll just read his message because he couldn't make it. We invited him to be the chief guest, but he couldn't make it. So he has sent a small message. So good evening, distinguished guests and media friends. Firstly, congratulations for the attempt and success of the international webinar titled Resiliency of Media in the Times of Global Crisis, Challenges and Opportunities, organized by the Department of Communication, Bangalore University. The current wave of corona has taken an intimidating place precisely in each of our life, but yet our enthusiasm and passion towards education have never taken a leap. The entering of knowledge-based society will not be successful if we cannot create a platform of building absorptive capacity within a framework of learning, exploring novel arena and innovations in education. Enthusiasm and readiness to assimilate and apply new knowledge is the key to transformation. To achieve the goal, the distance connection via ICT may be established for enabling the digital revolution and empowering society towards knowledge-based society. Congratulations once again for the efforts and best wishes for the Vice Chancellor of Bangalore University and all the teachers and staff, students, research scholars of Department of Communication, Bangalore University. Thank you very much. Now, may I request Shri Vinay Kamat, Editor-in-Chief, The Mint Daily, to deliver his valedictory address. He will be speaking on journalism in reset mode. Over to Shri Vinay Kamat.
Good evening, Vinay Kamat and Venugopal.
Venu.
Yeah.
Thank you, distinguished guests. A big thanks to Venugopal, who in fact I studied with in Department of Communication and who has gone on to redefine education in many ways. A big thanks to B.K. Ravi, who and I, who studied together in Maharaja's College of Journalism. And those were the times when journalism was seen to be a crusading profession. Much has changed since then. And we have, as journalists or the teachers of journalism, have been adjusting to it every month, every year. So I would start my small presentation by looking at what has changed and what is going to change. Okay, so the word that I chose in this very short presentation was a word called reset. It's a very different word from rethink, reimagine, because it means that most of the things that we do now will have to change. We have to start from ground zero. And some of the things that we are going to discover or rediscover are something that we never knew before. And it's a future that is dramatically changing. As I go to the next slide, this slide indicates why we are in crunch time at this moment. It's simply because COVID has pressed the pedal of acceleration, and the change that we are seeing is momentous and it is breakneck. So what were the things that were already changing and why is this happening? We are seeing new business models emerging. Journalism as we know it is gradually dying, or if not gradually, it is dying very fast. There's a fundamental shift from advertiser-driven models to pay for consumption models. And if you look at the image in the presentation, in the last few years, we have been going through digitization. There have been paid models, or people have kind of tried out paid models. There has been some amount of data which has driven journalism. And there has been some talk about structures in journalism which come to hierarchy, Should we have a pyramidal structure? Should we have a flat structure? And all this has got accelerated with the impact of COVID. And you see that digitalization has become the rigor. A paid model is becoming the norm, if not now, within the next 6 months. Uh, Data-centric approach is becoming the lifeblood of content. And a flat structure is becoming a must-have as processes become simpler. As I go to the next slide, I will then regroup this into 3 topics which I would like to focus on in this presentation. The first is data. Now, data defines what readers would like to read, who your readers are, and how do you need to target them. The quality of journalism is dependent on the quality dictated by data. So if a consumer or a reader, by the way, all consumers were formerly called readers, today they're called news consumers. So quality is a function of the kind of data that you generate or you compute using AI algorithms, which tell you what kind of stories you need to write, how to write them, okay, what kind of consumers to target. Now that has an immediate impact on the identity of the writer, the editor, from a inside out model, which journalism was, where the editor decided most of the things. It's becoming an outside in model where data decides everything. So as you see, or as we will see in the months to come, the role of the editor is going to be increasingly dependent on what data tells him or tells her. As we go to the next slide, I will explain a little bit about data. So when we were students, we were brought up on this great Marshall McLuhan statement, which of course holds true even today, that medium is the message. Today, if I were to put it in one line, with sufficient inspiration from Marshall McLuhan, is data is the message. And we don't read stories anymore, meaning readers don't read stories anymore. Stories read readers. Stories, the way you consume a story, the way you spend time on the first paragraph of a story, what you do after reading that story, how much time you spend on that story, and how many stories or different kind of associated topics you read determines what kind of a consumer you are. And AI-driven tools, algorithms, can adequately profile a reader or a consumer much more sharply and precisely than editors could ever have. AI-driven tools have created highly probable future scenarios. If you want to figure out what kind of readers you're going to have 12 months from now, AI-driven tools can tell you with a high degree of probability what those readers could be. As we move to the next slide, we see here what's happening is personalization defines the consumer, not the writer. Style replaces templates. Information benefits. Creativity recedes. So everything is structured on the basis of templates. Everything is structured on the basis of what a certain cohort would want to read. and therefore how to simplify the process of serving that cohort with the kind of content that cohort wants. So you see creativity, style, reasoning, and templatized, data-driven journalism coming to the top. That does not mean that style and creativity will die. Certainly, there will be people who will pay premium to get stylized content. But largely in a data-centric world, you will find templatized journalism, journalism that is easy to construct, simple to read, and is easily tailor-made for a certain cohort. In the next slide, you will see what people who are observing this disruptive business are saying. Yuval Noah Harari made this point that we are willing to pay for high quality food and clothes and cars. Why not high quality information? And that's certainly true that this is the bedrock of a paid model of journalism. If you want to be there, then you have to have high quality information. High quality comes from a deep interpretation, pattern analysis of the kind of content that a consumer wants. It also opens up the field to premium stylized writing. Point two, business models are in a state of flux. We are seeing the fragmentation of readership, demassification, deglobalization. Hyperlocal journalism is becoming far more important than national journalism. Personalization has begun where people want to read specific kinds of news rather than a large cache of news. They are very personalized in their tastes. They are very focused in what they want to access, be it newsletters, be it articles, be it videos, be it podcasts. And you see that the kind of journalism that is being delivered to them is dictated by readers, by consumers, through the kind of data they are putting out. We can go now to the next slide, and this kind of indicates what is happening. So how does an editor move from content creation, content optimization, content distribution to getting to the right target groups? So the funnel becomes narrower and narrower as he goes along, and he's able to target certain cohorts better because the game is moving toward hyperlocal, the game is moving toward demassification, and the game is more to a high level of customization. Next slide, please. So what does that mean for the editor? And we have been brought up over the years thinking an editor is a special being. And by editor, I mean the top leadership in a newsroom. What do they do? How do they design a newspaper? How do they select news? What is it that distinguishes an editor from many other people around him? So here it's increasingly gut instinct or nose for news, which are old world concepts now, will be now replaced by artificial intelligence driven news hierarchy that interprets readership patterns. Most routine work will be handled by AI, ML tools, making writing a highly specialized activity in journalism. A key metric defining journalism will be the engagement time, which could create new styles in journalism that are app friendly. So it's the engagement time of a particular target group that will decide what are the styles that will emerge in journalism. In the next slide, you see that that good old journalism is actually going to become a premium activity. You have to, as you customize, as you get driven by data, there will be slices of journalism which will still retain the old flavor. But by and large, a large part of journalism will know it will be driven by data. Next slide, please. So this slide more or less tells you how our life has changed over the years. Those of who studied in journalism and understood a newspaper to mean a product that reaches out to multiple audiences, as in the traditional Indian meal. You reach out to multiple audiences. Now you're moving to a very sharply focused, targeted readership as represented by the masala dosa. And is it going to be better? Journalism is going to be better or worse? I think journalism is entering a new phase where it is starting to discover new business models, where it is realizing that it has to create the kind of content that the new age consumer requires, and it is going to be data rich. There are going to be many benefits that are going to accrue to journalism, but the journalism as we knew it, which was driven by instinct, which was driven by a certain kind of intuition, which was driven by identities and personalities, will dramatically decline. So this is a glimpse of what is likely to happen. And we are kind of in the throes of it simply because there has been a loud knocking on our doors because of COVID. I thank you for being part of this presentation. And this is an idea. And even as I'm talking, it's happening. Thank you.
Thank you, Vinay Kamat, for your excellent presentation. We are very proud that you are the alumni of Department of Communication, Bangalore University. You have grown to a very top level, and now you are a renowned journalist of this country. We are very proud of you. So thank you very much. In spite of your busy schedule, you made it. Once again, thank you, Vinay Kamat. Now may I request the chief guest, Dr. Daya K. Thussu, to address all our participants.
Thank you so much for inviting me, Dr. Ravi. It's been a great privilege to speak to you all a bit virtually. I was very pleased to be able to speak to your colleagues and students. And I think this new kind of communication is extremely important, that we the boundaries don't matter, as long as you can get the time frame right. You can get people from all over the world to communicate, and I think that's very important because COVID has forced us to think in those terms. More webinars, and I think it's very important that we should encourage more of these within India, because you might be in Bangalore, you're talking to your friends in Kannada, or you're talking in the southern Indian context, and you have no idea what's happening in Assam or in Himachal. I think it's very important to have this kind of pan-Indian conversation. I think this is now possible with this technology, and I would extend it to make it global. There are every major university in the United States, you will have a Desi person there in whatever field. Contact her, ask her to speak to students in India. I'm positive 9 out of 10 people would say yes. And I think that will create a new kind of intellectual energy that Indian academia needs desperately. I'm speaking from my experience, having done my PhD in Delhi. And I feel that we have a lot to catching up to do. And so good luck to these kind of events. And I'm very pleased that this is happening. I've already done a few more in different parts of India and China. I'm sitting in London here in my home. So I think this is actually a very, very positive development. I think to Mr. Kamat's presentation, I thought it was very interesting. And although a bit, somebody old-fashioned like me who, likes reading slightly more serious stuff, not particularly driven by data, I actually think that, a newspaper like New York Times or The Guardian, they're actually doing much better because of their digitization, and a lot more people are reading them. New York Times claims to have like 3 million readership now. It's extraordinary. So there is that side of this too, in the sense that, some people at least would like to have a little more detailed analytical work, which I think journalism in India certainly has a tradition of. And it would be a pity that everything is decided by this machine. I think we need to be thinking more in terms of create a kind of discourse which is not defiled by the vulgarities of television news, where there's a shouting matches, and it's embarrassing to watch that. And you sort of feel what's happened to our Indian ethos. We used to have a certain public discourse. It doesn't matter what political affiliation, ideological affiliation you have, but there is a certain way of talking in public. And I think that has been defiled and debased to the extent that it is time that the university, a very important role in that. And I think, again, these kinds of webinars are very good ways of reinforcing what are the standards. Mr. Kamat talked about quality. Essentially, at the end of it, it is the quality which matters. I'm mentioning New York Times because it gives me certain perspectives, very American perspectives, but gives me perspectives that unfortunately, apologies to Mr. Kamat, none of the Indian newspapers do. And I read them regularly. It's my job. So where will we get that kind of detail that you're reading about Brazil in an Indian newspaper from an Indian perspective? Right? That's the challenge. And I think it is possible in today's time and age to do it because it's actually become much cheaper. So I'm a professor. I work in Hong Kong. I'm in London. I'm talking to you. That 20 years ago, that was impossible. So magnify that, accelerate that, and create a kind of intellectual energy that we need. And I think we have a lot to contribute, and I think we should use the Facebooks of the world and Zooms of the world to do that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Daya Thussu. Thank you very much. And may I request our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K.R. Venugopal, to deliver his presidential address.
So thank you. Are you able to hear me?
Yeah.
Thank you very much for inviting me to this valedictory function, the sixth consecutive day of this international webinar. And I'm extremely glad that I'm seeing my classmate Vinay Kamat. People might be wondering where is this Vice Chancellor fitting into this communication industry. Basically, I'm an electronics engineer, and in the college where I studied, Visheshwaraya College of Engineering, electronics was in the first floor and mass media was in the ground floor, and therefore I joined mass communication department where I met Vinay Kamat. And Professor B.K. Ravi is my junior classmate there, again in mass communication department. So today, the Vice Chancellor, Registrar are all from the Department of Communication. And we have with us learned erudite Professor Thussu with us. I'm very glad that we are all sharing platforms across the globe. a platform where there is no difference in the height of the platforms. All are on a single platform. There is no back bench and a front bench. And that's what we see on this online platform, where there is convergence of geography, convergence of language. You can talk in a language and it can be translated in another language and people will be able to hear, listen and converse. Convergence of culture, convergence of data. That's why we say when Kamat said that we are moving from news to data, data-centric models, paid models, and a pyramid structure to a flat structure. This is what we are seeing in today's international webinar. As Professor Thussu said, he is from Hong Kong, speaking from London. I am sitting at my home, and then the Vinay is sitting from his Delhi office, and we are still on a single platform. This could not have been imagined few years back. And what is the model which you are seeing now in the present media? The media has moved from what you call good journalism to a paid model. That means when you pay, you get whatever you want. And therefore, consumers in future will pay to get good ideas, good journalism contents. And that's what is going to happen. Whether it is a streaming series, whether it is TV companies, whether it is social network, they are competing with each other. Gone are those days where people had patience to listen to a long story for about half an hour, 1 hour or so. We have moved from the physical media to a digital media and offline to online and online to instance. So print media was overtaken by electronic media is overtaken by social media, and social media is now instant media. We are now on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, email and blogs. We have moved from newsroom to boardroom to drawing room to no room or a virtual room. We are all sitting in our virtual rooms and we are still discussing about the future of media. Media barons who are not seeing eye to eye, they are now cooperating to find out how to deliver data to the consumers. This is a data-driven age. So you have to package that data to the needs of the consumers. And how are we going to do that? We saw a hierarchical structure in the news media. Now we see a flat structure. Everybody is a journalist, everybody is a photojournalist. Everybody has a camera, everybody can write a blog, everybody can write a news item and then can distribute it to the entire world. This is what we are seeing in last few years. And how is it going to change in next 5 years? You have to work from home. There is nothing like somebody who will come and sit in the office and then you will interact. Breaking news will be the order of the day. Who puts the news first? And that is already happening. And Thussu was saying, digital revolution, digital Cold War. In fact, my research, I have published more than 900 papers. It is about digital revolution. It is about computer science and engineering. How it has changed this world. I've been teaching computer science for the last 41 years. And I have seen a change in myself in these 4 decades. I stopped purchasing the newspaper. Now I see it through iPad, a mobile phone. So the print media, where they said it is going to vanish 10 years back, it is still in the reckoning. I don't think good journalism will lose. It will survive. It will survive to the end. I don't think electronic media will lose if the content is good. So now the consumers will dictate the content. And the consumers, naturally, they want correct facts, good content, short content. That's why I said long story to short story and short story to instant story. That's what is going to happen in the media industry in future. We are seeing number of fake news. So this fake news will compete and deteriorate and finally will be eliminated. Because the fake news will be replaced by truth. Truth is as fast as the fake news, and therefore truth will finally survive. This COVID has taught us how to survive in the worst of our times. On the other day, somebody was saying, sleeping with the enemy. The enemy is COVID, and the media is sleeping with the enemy because media, newspaper after newspaper is getting closed for want of funds. Electronic media is competing with social media to survive. And in this age of competition, only truth, honesty will prevail, good journalism will prevail, and those which are shorter will prevail, and a good photo will always survive. I do not want to talk much because I have been specialized in computer science, but I'm trying to talk something about journalism where we have experience of 4 decades. Thussu is having experience of 4 decades. Vinay, Kamat, my own classmate, we are 35 years back classmates, and I will not be able to talk much when all these experts have spoken. Thank you, Thussu. Thank you, Vinay, Kamat. Thank you, B.K. Ravi and Sanjeev Raj and Shri for giving me an opportunity to deliver this valedictory address. I hope we will conduct many more such international webinars and bring out all the expertise across the world onto this Bangalore University Department of Mass Communication platform, and that benefit will be, very useful to all the students and the faculty of Bangalore University and world at large. Thank you, one and all.
Thank you, Professor Venugopal, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Bangalore University, for his excellent presidential address. Now it's the last event, the closing remarks and thanks. I think we'll wind up very fast. Professor Venugopal, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Bangalore University, Shri Vinay Kamat, Editor-in-Chief, the main, Dr. Daya, Thussu, and all my respected seniors, academicians, social scientists, media fraternity, and my friends. Department of Communication of Bangalore University always strive for excellence in education for the realization of a vibrant and inclusive society through knowledge creation and dissemination, always leading the communication nomenclature with a novel approach, and its experiments have been printed in bold in the history of education. Our department was part of Satellite Instructional Television Experiment in 1975, along with ISRO, and the department was the first to start television education in India. We were the first to start television education in India and had developed CCTV facilities to train students in the production of television and radio programs way back. Even someone think of digital integration in teaching. The objective of this international webinar was to highlight the remarkable contribution of media and its resilience to our lives. A glance through the list of presentations given in this 1 week reveals the amazing diversity of media experts' opinion in addressing the diverse fields of their expertise. With an inclusive approach towards challenges, barriers, and applications post-COVID-19, which have opened a new arena for media fraternity. There's a great demand for understanding resilience in media, and developing countries are not simply passive recipients of technologies created and shared by their developed partners. Now we are understanding the root level issues and are suffering, and a new reframe is developed to address the issues, and media plays a key role to redefine and reframe. Conferences such as this have provided valuable opportunity for communication scientists, industry specialists, and decision makers to experiment with truth. I am grateful to many experts who have come to share their knowledge this week. I am sure you had a fruitful and rewarding exchanges in the last 1 week. The first one was Dr. Jabbar Ali Obeidi, Professor of Journalism and Director, Minock Institute for Global Engagement, Bridgewater State University, United States of America, delivered a keynote on observing media resiliency, resilience in times of pandemic COVID-19 and other global crises. Sharing his upfront views on the ground realities of media functioning, made an attempt to relook and refine the role of media in society. Followed by Professor K.V. Nagaraj, the Pro-Chancellor of Assam University, Silchar. He spoke on issues confronting the Indian media, the present perspective. Professor's explanation on media liberty and his definition of democracy added a new value for understanding media. The statement of Professor, the dissent or dissent in the main crux, dissent for dissent is the main crux of the democracy, is a prominent thought. In his enlightening address, he emphasized on the relationship between the government, media, people, and how it will create a society of togetherness. Speaking about government and the corporates' hold and pressure on the media, he expressed concern about the death of the investigative journalism and the evolution of a selective journalism. Media houses are becoming the manufacturer of news and views. Their main focus is now shifting more towards gossips, Bollywood and crime than citizen-centric reports. This is immoral indication for a democratic country like India, and the responsibilities of citizens are high in keeping the country in a composed way. Professor Nagaraj opined that the active journalists should not rely on Googleology for their content, and must have cognitive empathy towards the problems of the common man. And at the end, he strongly gave hopes that the right decisions from the right citizens will definitely bring equilibrium in the society. The presiding talk by Dr. Srinivas Melkote of Bowling Green State University, United States of America, on development communication in the present scenario opened a new gateway in understanding development communication. Development communication should always serve as a facilitator. The local languages, experiences, narratives, and stories are given the priority, and the local active agencies must always be encouraged. This is the primary step for the development communication. He emphasized that mass media and communication technologies must act as advocates of the common people. Public participation, debate, and social choices are the indicators of socially well-being. Society should understand that people's movements are the vehicles for transformation and awareness. Quoting George Floyd, who was killed by the United States police brutality, he started talking about gadget era and how mobile technologies are giving the wider space for people's participation and creating quick crowd to pressurize governments to take action. Another eminent speaker, Professor Palagumni Sainath, P. Sainath, delivered his address on why corporate media cannot properly cover the lockdown crisis. It is not just the corporate or other media, but it is the collective failures of the government and its functionaries to address the crisis in lockdown, said the senior media veteran, Professor Sainath. After the advent of globalization, the media and journalism, which was serving more like a service, and the duty became the media industry. The success of the report or a program earlier was based on its effectiveness in bringing change, was seen in the eyes of TRPs. So more infotainment channels started booming suddenly. More of them were profit-oriented than the ethics-oriented. At this stage, Corona outbreak and the lockdown norms gave more space to groundwork for a journalist. Media houses started cutting its numbers, citing the loss and revenue to their organization. When the survival of an individual journalist became tough, it directly affected the news quality. Government also restricted many fearless journalists by laying them under many cases under national disaster law and others. Along with this, the hold of corporate giants on media houses also declined the quality of news and reports against the governments. The need of the hour is that an individual journalist must balance between their organizational interests and give justice to its duty. The dominance and influence of social media may be dominant, but its inroads towards development is still in nascent stage. He urged, as a responsible citizen, have an opinion and stand with print to protect the credibility of mainstream media. Yesterday's talk by another inspiring speaker, Professor Richard Breyer, Director of Documentary and Film and History at the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University, United States of America. He started inspiring the budding filmmaker to relook into the basic qualities productions. His experiments of last 3 decades was quoted as example to redefine documentary production, and he spoke of the future of documentary production. Today, you have listened to the learned Dr. Daya Thussu and our friend Shri Vinay Kamat, who both of them gave excellent presentations. More thoughts have changed in our minds, yet more to go. I take pride in mentioning our effort and experiments have influenced our participants to experiment more and more. So during this occasion, I thank all of you. Especially, I thank our Honorable Vice Chancellor, Professor K.R. Venugopal, for presiding over this valedictory function. And because of his support and encouragement, we could succeed in this international webinar. So I also thank our friend Vinay Kamat, who is a veteran journalist, editor-in-chief of the Mint, for sparing his valuable time. And it was an excellent presentation, which gave, it was just like the mirror of the Indian media industry, especially the print, what exactly going to happen. And he has predicted quite a lot of things. So thank you very much, Kamat, for your excellent presentation. We are very grateful to you on behalf of Department of Communication, Bangalore University, and all my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ravi.
Thank you. And I'm also thankful to Dr. Daya K. Thussu. With a very short span, I contacted him and he was very happy to deliver a lecture. And he is one of the very few experts who can be an authority on international communication globally. Is a renowned scholar, researcher, and again, I think I have to recall, I think, and his books, is only his books are the authority in international communication, and he's the one who is an expert even about the developments of China, and he's the person who can be an authority, and he can speak authoritatively on the global media. So again, thank you very much, Dr. Daya K. Thussu, for your excellent presentation. We are very grateful for you on behalf of Department of Communication, Bangalore University, and all my colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your kind words. Thank you.
Thank you. And I also take this opportunity to thank my 2 colleagues, Dr. N. Sanjeev Raj, Associate Professor, Department of Communication, and Dr. Shri, Associate Professor, Department of Communication. Without their support, it would have been never possible to organize such a successful international webinar. So thank you, Dr. Sanjeev Raj and Dr. Shri. And also take this opportunity to thank our research scholars, Mr. Prashant, Mr. Manjunath, and Vinod, all of them. The whole team has worked very hard because it was a week-long international webinar where we had more than 1,100 registrations and more than 2,500 people have listened to the talks of all these eminent personalities. And on behalf of the Department of Communication, Bangalore University, we are very grateful for your excellent response. When we had very limited time, we had just 2 days when we announced about this international webinar, and we got a roaring response from throughout the country and throughout the world, throughout the different countries. So I'm very thankful for each and every of the participants. And please don't worry, all of you will get your e-certificates. And I request all of you to continue to support and encourage Department of Communication, Bangalore University. And I think this is the first time a lot of vice chancellors and a lot of registrars, a lot of researchers, academicians, research scholars, students of journalism, students from social science, students from science background, a lot of media professionals, quite a lot of them joined with us to listen to quite a lot of people. It's a very big list. If I go on naming them, there are quite a lot of VIPs, a lot of dignitaries, a lot of celebrities who have attended this international webinar. On behalf of Department of Communication, I am very grateful to all of you. If I start reading the names of all the participants, it will take quite a lot of time. My dear friends, please pardon me. I'm ever grateful to all my journalism teachers from different universities within our state, outside our state, and we had a roaring response from some of our North Indian universities, including our Institute of Mass Communication, New Delhi, and quite a lot of editors had joined us. So on behalf of Department of Communication, Bangalore University, I take this opportunity to thank one and all for your support and encouragement. And Department of Communication, Bangalore University, we are planning to organize quite a lot of webinars in the coming days, because Professor Venugopal, the Honorable Vice Chancellor of Bangalore University, he was the alumni of our department, and I think he encourages us to organize quite a lot of things. And I will not name, because there are senior most professors, and I think with the blessings of our Guru, Professor H.S. Ishwar, and if I go on naming, there are quite a lot of my gurus, and I also thank all the resource persons who made it. And once again, I thank all of you profusely for making this international webinar a success. And let us not be afraid of this COVID-19. Indians, we are known for our solidarity. We are known for our confidence. Let us fight COVID-19. Please stay safe. Don't go out. And let us fight this pandemic. And once again, I thank all of you on behalf of Department of Communication, Bangalore University. Stay safe. I wish you all the best. Thank you very much. And again, we'll come back to you maybe sometime next week. Again, we'll meet with different experts. So thank you, one and all. Namaste.
Thank you.